You're sitting at a loud, chaotic family dinner. Someone says something that cuts a little too deep, or asks a favor you cannot take on. In that exact moment, your chest tightens. The words to defend yourself are sitting right there in your throat, but a loud internal alarm goes off telling you to keep quiet. So you smile, you nod, and you swallow it. Later that night, you feel entirely drained. You feel cornered and threatened, even though you did absolutely nothing wrong. Your only supposed failure was an inability to say one simple word: no. That paralysis you experience at the table is often written off as cowardice or a lack of spine. It is neither of those things. For millions of people raised in South Asian and Muslim households, the cultural environment systematically wires the developing brain to view a basic personal boundary as an act of treason. Your silence is a biological adaptation. To understand why you freeze, we have to look inside the brain's alarm system and see exactly how it gets hijacked. Most Western psychology assumes that humans operate as independent individuals, but South Asian and Muslim cultures operate on a collectivist system. The family unit comes first, and the group's harmony supersedes the individual. Psychologists call this extreme dynamic enmeshment. Psychological borders blur entirely, absorbing individual identity into the family web. If a child expresses a personal need or sets a boundary, the system registers it as a threat, snapping them back to the center. Children don't usually learn this through explicit rules written on a wall. They absorb it over thousands of microscopic interactions: a heavy silence from a parent, a disappointed look, a long guilt trip, or a harsh comparison. By the time that child reaches adulthood, their brain is programmed to equate self-advocacy with an existential threat to their family's survival. We all know the classic trauma responses: fight or flight. But there is a third biological adaptation that activates when fighting or running away isn't an option. It is called the Fawn response. When confronted with an emotional threat, the brain calculates that the safest way to survive is to instantly shrink down and prioritize the other person's comfort over your own. In daily family life, fawning looks like an automatic apology when you aren't at fault. It looks like enthusiastically agreeing to a family obligation while your stomach turns in knots. You just shrink to keep the peace. Because your brain learned that prioritizing others kept you safe as a child, it now fires a massive guilt signal every single time you even think about setting a personal limit. It treats your own needs as a dangerous mistake. You aren't lacking willpower when you fail to speak up. Your nervous system is actively overriding your conscious mind to protect you from being rejected by your family. Spending 20 or 30 years constantly scanning the room and fawning to meet everyone else's expectations creates a massive, heavy neurological toll. It often leads to a clinical phenomenon called alexithymia. If you ignore your own internal signals for long enough, you eventually lose the neurological ability to identify or describe your own emotional states. When someone asks what you actually want, you genuinely do not know. To make matters more complicated, collectivist families often use religion to enforce this self-erasure. Basic boundaries are framed as un-Islamic. You are told that obedience to parents requires total submission, and that prioritizing yourself is a failure of patience and sacrifice. But Islamic teachings state otherwise. The preservation of your mental health is classified as an amana, a sacred trust. The tradition strictly forbids the inflicting or reciprocating of harm, and maintaining family ties does not mandate accepting emotional abuse in silence. The crushing guilt you feel when trying to protect your peace is a product of intense systemic cultural conditioning. It is not a failure of your faith or your morality. Standard internet advice usually tells you to march up to your family, draw a hard line, and say no. In an enmeshed system, that strategy usually backfires and causes an explosion. Disarming this alarm system requires starting internally. Before you say a word to anyone, you have to counter the alexithymia by journaling. Write down what happened, how it made you feel, and what you needed in that moment. You have to relearn your own signals. Next, you build the muscle with micro-boundaries. You don't start with the biggest conflict. You start by taking 20 minutes alone without explaining why, or letting a call ring through and taking a breath before you text back. As you do this, the alarm will sound. The most critical step is learning to sit with that intense, overwhelming wave of guilt without immediately reacting to make it go away. You have to repeatedly remind yourself of one fact: guilt is a feeling, not a verdict. Your brain is misfiring an old survival mechanism. The presence of guilt does not mean you actually did something wrong. You cannot rewire these deeply embedded pathways completely alone. You need to find just one safe person, a friend, a sibling, a therapist, who understands what you are doing and can anchor you to reality when family pushback begins. Establishing personal limits is not a Western concept designed to destroy your culture. You can love your family deeply, respect your roots, and still say that something is too much for you. It is a necessary survival skill to become a healthy, whole human being.